Here we're going to look at repairing these flexible cables that are in many electronic products. This one happens to be a camcorder from Panasonic, and the original fault was the mechanism that goes around, this one here, that goes around the front of the camera. But I think during dismantling one of the cables has got snagged, and the resulting second problem, if I just zoom in, see if we can get closer on this, is this flexi cable here, you can see has actually broken from the rest of the cable, just where I'm pointing here. Very difficult to repair. Had a look around on the internet, very difficult to get spare parts as well. Otherwise I couldn't actually find a spare part, and even if I could find this KX23 flexible cable, there's a lot of connections on it, go all over the place, that would also be quite laborious and time consuming to repair, even if it was possible. This particular repair has got me a little bit stumped because of the difficulty in connecting to flexi cables and the actual pitch of the cables. You can see they're very tight. Here you can see I've tried to attempt to solder onto the connectors where it goes in, where the pads go into the connector on the main board. Wasn't very successful because solder tends to get everywhere and connect between the 2 or 3 or 4 copper connectors, so I gave up on that, cleaned it up, stopped them from shorting out. I think the next best option, and as I say, I've been thinking about this and attempting various things for the last several weeks, is to attack it from the bottom of the cable. And well, you can see, let's move around a little bit. You can see I've tried to, the other thing I tried is to split off the cables and try and connect them individually. That also had very limited success, because one of the problems is the copper connectors are sandwiched or laminated in between 2 bits of plastic. Harder piece of plastic is on this orange side of the flexi board, but underneath, plastic is actually thinner. I wonder if I can zoom in now. Plastic is actually thinner, and if I get to focus, yeah, here we go. You can see by scratching with a scalpel, a very sharp scalpel, you can actually start to expose the copper pads underneath. Let's get a better position on this. Try and zoom in. Okay. So where are we? So sharp scalpel. Starting to scratch off. What you really want to do, you can see these gold or copper colour is now showing up where I managed to scrape off the plastic underneath. Very difficult to get a scalpel in between the plastic layers to delaminate it, so what I've had to do is very carefully scrape away in this sort of motion. What you don't want to do is allow it to cut too deep so that it cuts through the copper insulation underneath. And ideally what we want to do is expose the, oops, lost it again. I want to expose the copper in different places. By different places I mean up, one at the top, one at the bottom, maybe different locations vertically, so that when you're trying to solder onto these copper connectors, you're not going to suffer the problem of connecting 2 tracks together. Right, what we've got to do now is try and get a little bit of solder. To stick onto the copper. Okay, something stuck there, I think a little bit too much. Let's have a look. Ideally we need to get closer. looks a mess. Well, because it is a mess. Now we're going to try and clean off a bit. Okay, what have we got? Come on, come on. I think we have some solder onto those first two connection points. And some extra solder on the plastic that we'll just wipe off. Okay. We have two solder pads now. What we've got to attempt to do is now connect a piece of wire onto them using temperature control soldering iron. The finest tip that I had, which is not that fine actually when you get on these scales. It's light with a magnifying glass, comes in somewhat handy, although the magnification is not great. Not much different to the iPhone really. To do is get some very fine copper wire, so stripped out some bits of plastic covered cable from telephone cable, and taking one copper core out, which is this bit here. We then have to tan the end with solder, so put it next to the piece of solder and get soldering iron and tan it. So I put soldering iron down while I do that. So now we'll attempt to just tan the end of the copper wire. The intention really, so the solder stuck to it nicely, intention being to leave a very small amount of solder on the end of it, just about right. So it's fractionally thicker than the copper wire. Line up the wire on top of the cable and just touch the soldering iron on the top, so that the solder then melts and connects to the track. So there you see we've got one wire that's been done already, and now I need to do the cable next to it. Notice the wire's at a slight angle. Doesn't matter the fact that it goes off and crosses over the top of adjacent wires, because it's only the one pad that's exposed, and the plastic from the flexi cable will insulate the other. Right, the trick now is to be very patient, try and hold the cable, hold the wire and the soldering iron, get them all lined up with the wire on top of the solder pad you've already prepared, and hold your breath, and by touching the wire, melting the solder, then solders onto the track below. And there we have two of them connected. So on this particular cable I've just got two more to do, so I'm going to have to expose some more tracks. Alright, here we can just about see, hopefully, that we managed to expose and solder tan another piece of track. That's the third track. Now again we'll try and show you the technique. A little bit difficult because the camera gets a little bit in the way, so it could be tricky. Let me just see if I can get this lined up. Okay. So next we need to lay the piece of copper wire over the top of the tan pad, finger soldering on over, and let's see if we can get that to join again. Rather difficult. Very difficult to see without a microscope. If you've got a binocular microscope, that would probably make things a little bit easier. Particularly difficult while I'm trying to film and solder. and shaking a little bit as well. Still recovering from carpal tunnel syndrome operation, which was only about 3 weeks ago, so excuse the shaking. There we go. And I think we've now got 3 wires attached. Hope we haven't got any shorts. We'll have to test that with a meter later. And of course, one of the next jobs is securing these wires so that we've got more mechanical attachment rather than just sitting on those copper tracks. We'll do that with probably some super glue in a minute. So just 3 of them connected. 4th one's going to be difficult. A lot of solder flux in the way. We'll have to count over the wires. 1, 2, 3, 4 in here. That one there. Keep scratching away to try and expose the copper. Oh, there we go. We have 1, 2, 3, 4th one exposed. Watch, there's a little bit of copper exposed next to it as well, so you're going to have to go a little bit higher up. And you can just about see them shining on the video there. So we'll continue to scratch away at that, moving a little bit higher. And then we'll tan those with a, well, when we've got one on its own, we'll tan it with a soldering iron and solder our copper wire onto it. So here we have all 4 wires connected, and I'll put some double-sided tape, see over here, in order to give a little bit of support for the wires, save them being accidentally knocked off. And what we've done also, and I'll repeat it now, is to use our multimeter to just buzz out the connections. So we just gently connect onto the copper wire and move the other end onto the connector of interest. You can hear it buzzing. When I get on that there, you should be able to judge whether you've got it on the right pad just by looking at where the tip of the multimeter probe is, and check it's not shorted to the other ones. All connections checked out, and the idea of using the double-sided tape to hold the wires in place so you can actually see the wires and make sure they're not shorting, and to give it a bit more secure fixing, we'll put a little drop of super glue onto the wires as well and leave that to dry for a little while. Okay, so now the super glue is dried and has mechanically fixed the wires a bit stronger, so hopefully they won't come off. Next job is to insulate the wires and connect them back up to the end of the circuit board. Okay, now I've got some pieces of insulation. It's actually been cut off from a small headphone piece of cable and wire. Stripped off the plastic, pulled out the copper in the inside. It's the smallest piece of insulated shielding I've got. I've done it in a fairly small section, so hopefully we can just feed it on in sections until the wire's out the other side. There's one section on, and then another section. Let's try from the other end. Hopefully you can see how small the insulation is in comparison to my fingers. Sometimes it helps to twist it a little bit as you're pushing it on. You've got to keep the wire very straight, so make sure you straighten out the wire beforehand. And there we are. We just do that for all of the wires, and then we'll take them around the back of the cable and glue them down later on for extra mechanical strength. Okay, so now we've got all 4 wires covered in the insulation. 2 sections of insulation each. Actually makes it slightly easier to bend around corners like this one, with less stress on the wire. Of course, a lot of stress is placed on the corner one, so don't have it too tight on that corner one. And where all these original connectors originally went was over to these connectors here. This is the bit that snapped off. So there's 4 connectors that we need to connect our wires to. So all we need to do now is position the wire on the place where it's going to be soldered. Deliberately keeping this wire rather long so it has lots of ability to bend, less likely to snap. So let's just see if we can get the wire to stay there before we bring this soldering iron up. I think I'm going to have to hold it in place, so well, you get the idea. Hold it in place, solder it, zoom in to have a look at these connectors. So yeah, here we are. So these are all the connections we've got to connect to. Fairly straightforward to solder the copper wire onto each connector then. So we'll see that in a minute. Okay, now we've got that soldered on, just need to cut the end of the wire off. Okay, that's all 4 wires connected up, and then we'll just add a little bit of insulation to stop the exposed bits of wire shorting against anything else. So we'll just pop this insulating tape underneath those corners that have the wire a little bit exposed, stop it shorting against anything else, in particular this circuit board underneath. So there's a little bit of insulation tape. What we also need to do really is mechanically secure these wires a bit firmer. Now they're sticking up quite a lot. I hope they're all going to fit inside the case. I think they probably will do. They're not shorting against each other, which is good. So I think what we'll do is put some little spots of super glue onto the wires where they touch the circuit board perhaps, and put some tape on the top to secure them firmly. I'm guessing that cable probably folds back like that, so we have to take that into account. So I think just some insulating tape on top. And next job is to check with the meter again by buzzing out with the meter to see whether these connections, these new connections that we made, are still actually connected. So what we need to do is get our probes and check from one end to the other. Yep, that's good. And it's not showing that with the other ones, which is good. Number 2. Yep, number 2's there. Not shorting. Number 3. Yep, that's good. Just make sure it's not shorted to 2. I think that's just where we're touching on the exposed number 3 wire. Yep, that's good. And number 4, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, that one. Not shorted to 3. Yeah, so we all seem to be good. Okay, now we need to put everything back together again inside the camcorder and see if that's fixed it. And I won't go through all of the instructions about how to install it all. Anyone who's taken things apart can work out how they go back together again. So this is a Panasonic HDC-SD60 camcorder. Originally this mechanical shutter mechanism started jamming up, which I think from memory was caused by a bit of plastic breaking off around the motor. That was fixed, however it didn't work afterwards, and when I took it apart again, as I said earlier, I discovered that this ribbon over here had broken, which May have been caused by some sort of mechanical fatigue earlier, but it probably was caused by catching when the unit was moved out from the main board. So just shows you've got to be careful when you're taking things apart. So I'll put it all back together again, and let's see if it works. A quick shot of the insulating tape placed over the top of the flexi cable, just to make sure those wires don't move while still remaining somewhat flexible. So there we see the final repaired cable actually in place. See, it has quite a twist on it before it connects, and obviously the red tape is the extra insulation tape we put on to cover the wires. So best to test it at this stage while the case is all exposed. Everything's plugged back in again, battery on the back, and so before we put the case back on, let's open up. A little bit of power on. See, the shutter is shut at the moment. The original fault was this would stick, because I think a shift in the motor occurred. So I'll press the power button and see what happens. Fingers crossed. Yay! Shutter opens, and camera seems to be now operational. Check the zoom, which was the fault with the cable that we repaired, and yep, we are zooming in and out. So the camera is now fully functional, at a saving of several £100 compared to buying a new one. The problem now is caused by the fact that it's been months since I took this apart, because it's taken me ages to work out, well, I'd have the patience to repair that ribbon cable, to work out the best way of doing it. The problem now, as I say, is working out where all these different screws go and getting the case back together again. A little bit of trial and error involved, but shouldn't be too difficult, so we'll see in a minute how it turns out. Okay, there we are. Camera all back together again. No screws left over, which is good. And just to confirm, it's all working okay again. Camera, shutter open, and zoom working. Right, job done. Took quite a while to work out how to do it, but quite pleasing when it's done. That's the satisfaction of doing jobs yourself. Okay, thanks for watching.